Dan Glickman was a congressional member. He told stories, maybe he used paper plates, I don't know, from the floor of the Congress, and to grab people's attention and to teach them and try to lead them. He was the agriculture secretary. He managed, how big a bureaucracy is that? How many people?
100,000.
Only 100,000 people, and however many other people are associated with agriculture across the country. And he was president of the Motion Pictures Association. Dan Glickman is an incredible person who is so committed to food, food security, nutrition and agriculture, and movies. Would you welcome former Agriculture Secretary Dan Glickman?
Thank you. Thank you. Frank just told you that I couldn't keep a job, so I went from place to place to place. So Adam and Aaron were great because they told a great story. So I want to give you maybe what I call my 5 principles. But the first principle, remember, is what Shakespeare said. He said, the play is the thing. Now think about that. That means the substance is fine, but it's the narrative or the play that's going to decide how successful you're going to be, whether you can tell the story and whether you're articulate and can communicate and do all those things. So Shakespeare wasn't too bad. After 400 years, we're still reading his stuff. And so it's important to remember that. I say it all the time, the play is a thing. That's why American film, television, motion pictures, all forms of entertainment are so powerful. But let's go through 5 things. First thing, how many of you remember the movie The Graduate? Okay, remember when Dustin Hoffman was looking for work, his father-in-law gave him the secret sauce, and the secret sauce was plastics. Those of you who haven't seen it, go back and watch it on Netflix or someplace else. Okay, well, I'm convinced that the secret sauce today of the future of our planet and of economic future is food, food security, food production, farming, NGO activity in the developing world. And so today we're finally recognizing that these lines of work, helping people feed themselves, producing food, nutritious food, packaging food, helping global food security issues in the developing world, that's the secret sauce of the future. So when you're looking around for careers, this area is promising. And why is it promising? We've got 7 billion people now. We're going to have 9.5 billion people in 30 years. We've got to feed these people and do it in a creative way, in a sustainable way. What a great opportunity for the future. So if the Graduate was made today, I would say farming, agriculture, food security, not plastics any longer, although plastics is still a good thing, but it's not the one thing. Second thing, how many of you people have seen the movie Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner? Okay, remember the great line from that movie was, if we build it, they will come. And it was kind of a metaphorical movie about the baseball world in Iowa during the 1920s or so, and it had also to do indirectly with a scandal in baseball that occurred many years ago. But when it comes to the areas that we're talking about here, that's no longer true. If we build it, they will come. That's like saying if we grow it or we raise it, they will buy it and eat it. Not true any longer. It is if they want it, if they think it's safe, if it's produced in the right way, if it meets their needs, if it's nutritious, then maybe they'll buy it. And a lot of the big retailers like Walmart and others are finding that's the case. And what that does is it empowers people to be able to influence the world of food and agriculture like never before. So when I was growing up, it was what was sold is what you bought, and what your mother told you to eat is what you ate. But today that world is different. The ability of consumers to be empowered is changing the force of food production, the way we think about it. It's positive, and it fits into the first thing I talked about, which these are really great careers, and they're different, and they're changing, and there's room for big agriculture, medium-sized agriculture, and small agriculture in all of these endeavors, both in the United States and around the world. The third thing I'd like to talk just quickly about is science. And I don't have a movie to talk about science, but in yesterday's New York Times, former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich wrote an op-ed about science, but it wasn't about food security. It was about health. And he said we ought to double the budget of the NIH from what it is right now. And he gave this very articulate reasoning why science was so important. And he talked about the science of health and really talked more about Alzheimer's disease and cancer and science and everything else. And you know, science isn't perfect, 50, 60 years ago, doctors said smoking was okay for you, and now we know that it isn't. But by and large, we cannot exist without science, good science, and we can't be afraid of science. And so oftentimes there's a lot of political science in the whole decision about what scientific endeavors to pursue. But we will not be able to feed a hungry world sustainably without at least understanding and appreciating the value of science. And that doesn't mean kind of science that comes from some giant company necessarily, but it does mean that there are certain basic things you have to do to grow food sustainably, especially when you have the challenges of water, you have the challenge of water shortages, water scarcity, energy, pests and diseases of plants. So not so much a story there, but in the same way that Newt Gingrich told the story as former Speaker of the House about the need for science when it comes to health, we need to think about the need for science when it comes to food and agriculture in the same vein, because for the future of the world, they do relate to each other. The fourth issue has to do with food waste. How many of you watched the MSNBC show last night on food waste? Anybody here? Really get it on YouTube. Did you like that show? It was a spectacular show about how much food we waste, in both here in the United States and globally. And we waste food for different reasons. In the United States, we waste food largely because of affluence and because of things like big refrigerators. Think about it. If you have a huge refrigerator to fill, you'll buy more food for it. And in the developing world, they waste food largely on farm because of lack of refrigeration and storage and transportation. But we waste roughly 30 to 40% of the food that's either grown, raised, or bought in this world. And you think about it, if we have to feed another 2.5 billion people without ripping up forests or planting on highly erodible land, we've got to have some creative ways to deal with this issue. And it's kind of low-hanging fruit if we did it in a successful way. And so as you look at the careers and the future of agriculture and how you deal with climate and weather and how you are going to be able to raise all this food sustainably, food waste is becoming more and more an integral part of this particular equation. And again, it offers promising careers in the future. And the fifth issue is what I call the relationships between food, medicine, and health. And Frank, I don't know if you're focusing very much on the issue of medicine today, but I want to give you a little vignette. This last week, I'm involved with something called the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and we had a big symposium on nutrition, agriculture, and health. So on one of the panels was a medical doctor, and he asked in the audience to raise the hands. There were 700 people in the audience, 700 people. How many physicians were in the audience? One other person out of 650 raises their hand. Now, mind you, this is a meeting on health, nutrition, and agriculture. The old French philosopher who once said, "You are what you eat." It has a lot to do, that what you eat has a lot to do with how healthy you are as an individual and how healthy you are as a society. So then he asked, well, how many nurses and other healthcare practitioners were there? About 2 others raised their hands. It was striking to me. Then about 3 months ago, I was on a program for a think tank here in Washington, and the subject was non-communicable diseases in the developing world, and we were talking about diabetes and heart disease and cancer problems. And in the report, there was virtually no mention of food and nutrition. And yet we know domestically that to a large extent, chronic diseases are caused by what you eat and to some extent about how you exercise yourself. And so if you're looking at, one of the problems we see in a society is we get stovepiped. So everybody thinks that agriculture's here, nutrition's here, medicine's here, and never the twain shall meet. And many agriculturists want to have nothing to do with the medical profession. And many people in the medical profession think that food and agriculture is just not very important because you're not treating people horizontally, like lying down after they get their diseases. So as we look at climate change and other things, my point is that we should think about these issues of food, nutrition, and health holistically rather than separately. Conferences on agriculture and food need to involve health. The fastest growing part of the national budget of the United States is Medicare and Medicaid. And the biggest part of that growth is chronic disease. diabetes largely, but other things as well. So what you eat and how you eat and what is grown and where it's grown and how people source their food locally has a lot to do with how healthy they are, and how healthy they are will determine what the nature of the economy is. So that's my aggregate picture. I tried to give you as much story in the mix, but telling a good story is really often the only way to get people to get motivated. But final point again is, those of you who are interested in careers in food and agriculture, domestically or globally, the sky is the limit. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Dan. You know, before you go, thinking about story and thinking about politics and all the rest, you know, I covered Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, right? And what he always did when he did that State of the Union, there was always somebody up in the gallery, and he would try to acknowledge them, and he would talk about them, and they were some character who'd overcome, and the other presidents have done it. President Obama did it in his last State of the Union. This idea of character, of having a person to talk to. Does that help? Is that essential to telling these stories?
Yeah, and the other thing is the old expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words. People, I've learned over my life that people have to visualize. While intellectually hearing about something is important, seeing it gives you the emotional connection to the story. So as these two gentlemen were talking about before, we saw the pictures of people doing their things. And the same thing's true here, and the same thing's true with politics. The people who can help people see, visualize the issue are the ones that will be most successful.
Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you all. Okay.
All right.